Well, how do people win by 25%? As I have seen in some cases, and
by the way, you don't even have to get the popular vote in this country to win.
But seriously, I think for us in Rwanda, we saw it coming, that it could even have been 100%, because this election, this last we had, came on the basis of a demand that actually stand again. For me, I was ready to wind up and finish my second term by 2017. And all of a sudden, there was mobilization. There were 4 million signatures that went to Parliament and wanting petitions, wanting that actually they change the Constitution. And funny enough, not just the Constitution in its entirety or to cover broad areas or long term, it was particularly asked that it be changed almost to suit what they wanted, and that was for me to have another term. That became a complicated issue. In fact, for me, we went back and forth, and I was trying to tell people that maybe we should actually accept change as and when it should happen. And I was for that change to happen, but the people insisted it was completely a different situation. And they tried to contextualize the political and other problems of Rwanda and the history and all kinds of things. And so that's what it followed. So it was more or less an agreed, result for the election. So having over 90% in terms of the results wasn't surprising to people in Rwanda or who followed closely the issues of Rwanda and who can relate those things happening with the history, particular history and particular context of Rwanda. If you're talking about other countries, maybe you'll be seeing different things happen. If you're talking about Rwanda, it's not surprising that it can happen. And again, it goes back to the same point in time you alluded to of what has happened in our country. A country that 23 years ago was almost no more. It was not there. We had to build it, to rebuild it right from scratch 23 years ago. Now it is a country that is standing and making some progress, and people of the country getting more united than ever before, because initially and what led to those problems was political and other divides that were created for a long time, where we lost 1 million people in just 100 days. That, if anyone thinks that doesn't have any implications on people's lives or on society or the thinking or even in the politics, I think one would be mistaken. And really, I'm trying to say this is related to that history, to those events, and to what happened, and even the psyche that was created in the society because of that time.
So one of the unfortunate cliches about African leadership, and it's a cliche because it's happened so often, are men who won't leave the stage. As you know, I worked with Nelson Mandela, and one of the most extraordinary things he did in his whole long life was to decide not to run for re-election. And I think he did that in part to give a model to the rest of Africa. What does it say, though, about you? And we chatted a little bit about this beforehand. So you'll have another 7-year term. And then you also have an opportunity for 2 successive 5-year terms after that. What does that say to the continent about succession for leadership?
Well, I know quite a bit about Mandela. In fact, I was fortunate at different times to associate with him. And what I know also is it is not entirely true that he left because he wanted to have that as a demonstration of how to deal with the power. No, there are other reasons. But my point here is, in fact, in 2002, I'll tell you a story that answers the question to an extent. We were with him in Barcelona. There was former President Bill Clinton. There was the current Secretary General of the UN, Guterres. He was Prime Minister at the time in Portugal, and a number of other leaders, and we had a discussion. The same Mandela, great man he was indeed, brought up an issue, and it was somebody had just started it by asking Guterres whether the Secretary General, whether he was actually ending his, because he was in his 2nd term and wasn't coming back. And somebody said, but don't you ever think about, continuing, because at that time he was doing fine in Portugal and so on and so forth. But that sparked a conversation where, in fact, Mandela angrily was telling people at the time, he says he's tired of, because it was happening, and there was a case developing, and I'm sure you are aware of this, in Namibia, about Nujoma, who was supposed to continue, and there was a discussion, and there was external, backlash that, he must go, he can't stay, and so forth. And Mandela said, why aren't people allowed to make their decisions and choices about how their countries are to be managed? Why is there everywhere, something is talked about, then there's, you can't stay, you can't be there, you must go, he was angry saying that. The discussion went on, and in fact, my viewpoint at that time, and which I raised in that particular meeting, was to tell them, I said, exactly partly what you are pointing out. I said, you see, while I appreciate the point that President Mandela then was actually bringing up, of always, these dictates coming in from outside and telling the countries and the people and say, you can't have this, you can't do that, and so on. I said, the danger indeed has been at times when leaders are going to continue and stay in power, it's not clear whether it's on the basis of the choice of the people of that country. If it is clear, if it can be identified and made clear, and everyone sees that, then it would be justified that the people of any country could make any decision, and they should have what they want to have. But that is where the problem lies. Sometimes you're not sure whether it is the people saying they want this to happen, or it is the leaders deciding by themselves to say, we want to continue. This was the conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to show you that, some of these things are not just clear-cut, that, when this is written like this, it should happen like that, and of course this externalization.
Yes. Well, and you've been eloquent talking about the distinction between Western views of democracy and perhaps what democracy is in Africa or Rwanda. And I think we Americans, until recently at any rate,
it means a lot.
Yes, but we seem to think that our ideas of democracy are universal, but you've talked about why it's not great to superimpose Western ideas on Africa and Rwanda. I'd love to hear you talk a little more about that.
Yes, I will be happy to talk a little bit about that. Democracy is democracy. Now this whole thing of adding Western is okay, but what does it mean? Because all countries, all peoples of this world can hardly fit into this sort of definition. They can't fit there because we come from different backgrounds, different places, different histories, different cultures, different contexts. We all can't fit into that sort of description. But there is this word, very important word, democracy. Absolutely. That is a principle all of us would wish to associate with. But associate with in as far as the history, the culture, the context allows that, and to what extent. And maybe even saying that, the West trying to tell everybody to, fit into that sort of demand and description, comes also with another sort of connotation that, in fact, while the West talks about and teaches so much about freedoms that normally are also associated with democracy, by indeed imposing or telling people how they should live their lives without this context, this history, or values and cultures that people have been brought up into, is actually denying people freedom. So in other words, on one hand, you're having people prescribing for others how they should live their lives, but the same people who also say they abide by freedoms, and they want people to be free. How am I going to be free when you want to dictate to me how I should live my life? This becomes the question. Mm-hmm. So, and of course we have seen also the consequences in this across Africa, in many places. One thing adding to another in a history of a long time, where, until recent, even in the recent times, dictation made to countries how they should manage their politics and their lives. Problems happen, and the same people who imposed what must be done will turn around and blame the same people for the problems that will have developed out of what they imposed. We don't need to look far. You can take a case of recent cases of Libya. Libya was no democracy. Gaddafi had his own problems with all of us and across the continent. Maybe he had problems with his own people. Now some people, part of it was created from within on its own. Other things happened from outside. And they went to Libya and bombed the hair out of everybody in Libya and ended up with Gaddafi dying. The question is, what is happening in Libya now? People who wanted to create a different situation, maybe a better situation, maybe create some democracy in Libya. Where are they, and what do we have? We can talk about many places in Africa, forgetting the way the societies are organized, how they have come to be the way they are, and maybe there are demands for changes across Africa, but these changes don't just happen overnight and don't happen anyhow. If you don't look at the situation you're having to deal with and understand it, and just say things must change, sometimes to the point of even dictating who must be what. Like, let me go back to my case in Rwanda. You know, it was very ridiculous. Just before even the constitution changed, and so on and so forth. From across, we have friends all over here in the United States, Europe, wherever. And they would say, oh no, President Kagame, you must go. I said, I'm happy to go. He said, you know, other people can come and take over after you and things will be fine. I said, that's okay. He said, how do you want me to do it? They would even name names. They would, Rwandese. He said, no, no, but so and so can, you know, do it, and so and so. Or you can actually look for somebody, you can groom somebody and have him, you know, take over from you, and so on and so forth. And then I would point out a couple of weaknesses in that. First, I'm saying you are the people who are teaching us about democracy. At the same time, you are actually coming to me and saying, you know, so and so can actually be president of Rwanda. So you are the one choosing. Well, according to that double standard, of course, for them, if that happened, it would be democracy, because they wanted it. Second, I would say, if you are telling me to choose who takes over after me, again, it's not a democracy you are telling me, actually, that we should be respecting. So meaning you are saying, either we choose or you choose who takes over from you. That's the democracy. And then I asked them, I said, how about the people of Rwanda? I haven't heard of them in this decision. You are just saying we can advise you who takes over after you, or you can actually decide who will take over after you. How about the people of Rwanda?
Good idea.
It goes on. So there's absolute confusion about this whole, you know, definition and the application of many things we are told we should be doing. And the people of any country are left out of this process and decision making.